Hi, I'm Bierbaum, and in this video, I'll show you how the cult of busyness, as I like to call it, has led us to be in a constant state of stress or agitation, as I term it in terms of my 5 motivational states model, and how that has become a badge of honor and an element of our culture that is hard to escape. You'll get a sense of where that's coming from, you'll get an appreciation for why it needs to change, and most importantly, you'll get an idea of what you can do about it in your own life. If you've ever been stuck in traffic when you're running late for a meeting, and presuming you're not a Zen monk, you'll recognize the state of agitation. It's that state where you're pushing too hard against life to make things happen in a certain time or in a certain way, and life is having none of it. Does it sound familiar? Today's corporate world is full of it, and it leads to stress. And technology was supposed to help. However, that's only made it worse. In gaining email and online communication, which supposedly made things faster, we didn't bank that hour every day and take off early. We now just work till 10 o'clock because our boss has access to us. Another example is Google Maps. They can suggest alternative routes to avoid heavy traffic. However, they don't have a danger meter, and so they sometimes offer you an alternative that goes down those dodgy parts of town. I live in Johannesburg, perhaps one of the most dangerous cities on earth, with some particularly dangerous urban areas. And so when Google Maps tells you to go in a certain direction, you've got to kind of be sussed about that and go sometimes, And when you're stuck in a dangerous part of town, to stay with that analogy, you're probably not going to start hooting at anybody who gets in your way. You're probably not going to want to draw attention to yourself. In fact, you probably want to get out of there as quickly as possible. And when you do get out, you're very likely to tell someone about your experience as a way of dealing with it. Now that is an analogy for the state of agitation, because like downtown Johannesburg, it's a bad neighborhood. You don't want to be there for too long. You want to get out as quickly as possible. You want to recognize when you're there and get out as quickly as possible. In the first of these series, I introduced a matrix of 5 motivational states that I've identified through my work as a high-performance life and executive coach. You can see them now. There's the state of agitation, using force, pushing too hard, which we've just described. The state of flow, that ideal state where we get lost in the task and lose track of time. Animation, that positive action towards a goal, that early state of getting going where we experience a bit of a dip. The state of rest, which is the state of active relaxation for the sake of recovery, and the state of ennui, which is that flat bored state where we resist activity. You can find out more about the model in the links below. Also, in the first few episodes, you saw that if you spend too much time in the state of rest, you drop down into that flat state of ennui. Too much time in ennui, and you struggle to get going. You can even become depressed. Similarly, if you spend too much time in the state of agitation, you'll develop the symptoms of stress. In modern life, and in the corporate workspace in particular, the performance and delivery expectations are very high and have been increasing for years. Everybody wants everything yesterday. We have to do more with less. The whole world is in a mad rush. As a result, everybody is consistently and constantly in a state of agitation, which, as mentioned, is the precursor to stress and ultimately burnout. I've encountered many project managers in particular who've become burnt out by the unrealistic expectations placed on them. No wonder that stress is so prevalent and employee wellness has become an increasingly important area of focus. An important consequence of this phenomenon is what a recent Harvard Business Review article called the busyness paradox. Essentially, your attention and ability to focus narrows, so what behavioral researchers call tunneling. You tend to focus on the most immediate and often low-value tasks that are right in front of you. Other research has shown that you actually lose about 13 IQ points in this state. One researcher quoted in the article calls this a firefighting state of time pressure. Whenever I get to this point during any of my corporate talks, the question always comes up about organizational culture. What choice do you have but to be in a state of agitation when the culture demands so much of you? What can you do to manage yourself? This is an obvious and valid question. The problem does exist at an organizational level, and in fact, it extends beyond any single corporate culture. I've covered this in other videos around the primacy of shareholder value, creating shareholder value. We talk about people, planet, and profit, but ultimately, it's about profit. And so we need to become aware of those structural issues as well. The research that I've just referred to in the Harvard Business Review article found that while every organization and person interviewed espoused work-life balance as a core value, they all, without exception, struggled to live that value. The result at an organizational level is that you don't make time to focus on long-term goals. You also tend to drop important parts of your process like project review meetings. In other words, you don't deal with the causes of the firefighting, and therefore you don't identify and fix things that would avert future firefighting. It becomes a self-reinforcing spiral. This series is focused more on the individual and self-management. So let's look at how you as an individual can manage yourself when you recognize that you're in this state of agitation. Perhaps the first step is to investigate your relationship to the state of agitation. As the HBR article says, many workers very publicly wear this overworked state like a badge of honor. So ask yourself, am I caught in that trap, which is really not about caring for me, but about how everyone sees me? If your answer to that question is yes, you're like that person caught in traffic in a bad neighborhood, silently agitated and bursting to escape. Now ask yourself, is that how I choose to spend my working life? Perhaps it's time to set a new standard, one where not being hectic all the time is an indicator of dedication, efficiency, smartness, and living the company values. So in other words, the starting point for getting out of the state of agitation and thereby reducing stress in the world as we find it today is in fact about challenging social norms. Here are some questions you can throw out there when you're doing this. Shouldn't work be an opportunity for growth? Isn't work supposed to be where we can express our passions and consistently enter and recreate the flow state? In your dreams, I hear most people say when I suggest that. However, if you do manage to say these things, you'll be like that person who's escaped the bad neighborhood and is telling their story as a warning to the world. When you've passed that hurdle, or perhaps even while you're still dealing with it, you might want to try out a little mindfulness practice. That means becoming present and evaluating your own relationship to your chosen activities. Are you pushing too hard to make things happen within a certain time or in a certain way? If so, what can you let go of trying to control? Conversely, what can you control? If you bring your attention completely to that one thing or one thing at a time that you can control right now, you reactivate the conditions for the flow state. You'll find, firstly, that your performance improves, and secondly, that some of those uncontrollables get taken care of. Other people step in to do them, or something happens where they're no longer needed. In my view, the German philosopher Eckhart Tolle, who wrote The Power of Now, hits the nail on the head when he says in his later book, A New Earth, when you want to arrive at your goal, more than you want to be doing what you are doing, you become stressed. And this is your indicator that you're in the agitated state, that you're wanting to get finished or get to the next thing more than you want to be doing what you're doing right now. When you find yourself doing that, you can know that you're on the road to stress. Another way to view this is through the lens of the research into the flow state. According to Mihaly Csikszentmihalyi, you lose the flow state when the perceived challenge rises too high relative to the perceived skill level. When that happens, anxiety is likely to arise. You usually see this in sporting competitions when the one player or team starts to lose ground. Their ability to regain their performance will depend on their perceived ability relative to the other player or other team who represents the perceived challenge. If that perception doesn't get corrected, the player or team who is chasing the game will move into the state of agitation. They'll try too hard and be more likely to drop the ball or force and miss the shot, and thereby bring about the very result that they were hoping to avoid. Naturally, if you find yourself in that state, you want to sit back a bit. You want to start to trust yourself, trust the process, trust life a little more. And perhaps at the same time recognize that if this thing doesn't happen exactly the way you want it to, it won't, in fact, be the end of the world. There's no need, and it wouldn't help anyway, to stress about it. Focus on the task. So always the trick to exiting the state of agitation is to, wait for it, care less. Many people are horrified to hear this. Of course, it doesn't mean that you shouldn't care at all. It just means to drop back into caring right now only about the things, or to be precise, the one thing that you can control. Perhaps the better phrase would be to stress less. Yes, you could still care about everything else, and yet you choose to focus your attention on the one thing you can control right now. If you can create this as a habit of mind, you will not only improve your performance, but your results and your experience of life. Because after all, who wants to live their whole life in a bad neighborhood? Thank you. To find out more on the motivational states, you can read any of the books in my personal effectiveness series, sign up for an online self-coaching course, or inquire about talks and one-on-one coaching, all in the links below. If you found value from this, please remember to subscribe, and I look forward to seeing you in the next one.